They want me to start off with ancient wisdom or mystical secrets. But I'll share something different. Yesterday, I watched a kid attempt to catch water with his fists. The harder he squeezed, the less he held without realizing it. This kid knew more about real power than most masters. I've met you, see. I've spent years observing men shattering their hands against wooden boards, thinking that each broken piece demonstrates their strength. I did the same, shattered the boards, won. The battles pursued faster kicks and harder blows. The world witnessed perfection. I had emptiness. Here's the thing, no one explains to you about mastery. The instant you believe you have attained it is the instant you have lost it. I learned this lesson, not in a temple or a gym hall, but at my highest moment of pride, when I believed I had nothing left to learn. Let me share with you that day. But first, listen to this. What I'm going to share isn't about martial arts. It's about the lie we tell ourselves about power, about victory, about what it means to be strong. A lie I believed until it nearly destroyed everything I'd built. I remember my first day at Master Arman's school, 16 years old, thinking I knew what strength meant because I could win street fights in Hong Kong. I walked in, ready to prove myself. Instead, I found myself flat on my once more, not from force, but from something I couldn't even see. The other students murmured that I was talented, that I was learning quicker than anyone. What they did not know were the nights I practiced punching water in a bucket until my knuckles bled, thinking that pain was the way to power. I practiced until my body cried, believing that tiredness was somehow evidence of improvement. Everyone around me revered power. They quantified it in shattered boards, in knockout win. In the terror they could inspire in others, I became precisely what they desired: stronger, faster, more destructive. With each new day in America, they referred to me as the Oriental Warrior, a human weapon. Studios promoted me as unstoppable. Magazines published my lightning fists. Students came in droves to learn my secrets. But here's what tormented me. The stronger I got, the more I felt like that bucket of water, held constrained, defined by strict boundaries. Each new accomplishment became a prison. Every demonstration of ability contributed to another chain. I was turning into a prisoner of my own image, a captive of others' expectations. I perceived the same need in my students' eyes, that I had that desperate desire to establish themselves as powerful to be feared. They approached wanting destruction, but what they required was dissolution. I know, because I trod the same road, pursued shadows of power, until I discovered a truth that turned everything around. This was my beginning. This was where my true journey started, not in learning to fight, but in unlearning all that I believed I knew about power. And it began with one question that kept me up at that night. What if all that I had done was really getting in the way of what I could become? I became a collector of victories. Each why was a brick in a wall. I was constructing a wall between me and failure, between me and weakness. Every morning I'd wake up considering who I had to impress that day. Every evening I'd go to bed figuring how to be even more extraordinary tomorrow. When you're the fastest fist in the East, you can't be second fastest. When they call you the dragon, you can't let them see you're human. 100 demonstrations, 100 perfect performances, no room for doubt, no margin for error. The pressure wasn't merely about win. It was about being superhuman. They placed me on magazine covers, named me the ambassador of Kung Fu to the West. Suddenly, I wasn't merely fighting for myself. Every bout became a referendum on Chinese martial arts. Every victory or loss would either honor or shame centuries of tradition. The weight of an entire culture's hopes bore down on my shoulders. My opponents weren't just fighters no more. They were threats to all. Everything I was meant to represent. I developed rules for myself. Never tire, never acknowledge pain, never express doubt. I taught myself to smile, through weariness to perform impossible movements with ease. The more difficult it became, the more I had to make it appear. I was no longer simply practicing techniques. I was rehearsing perfection. And here's the real poison of it all. I began believing my own performance, began assuming that anything less than supremacy was disgrace, that vulnerability was weakness, that doubt was failure. I had constructed a throne of expectations, but that throne was turning into my prison. The worst part, I was instructing this same prison to my students, instructing them to pursue the same ghost of perfection that was haunting me every time they addressed me Sifu, every time they gazed at me with that desperate need to learn the secret of power. I felt the wall. Prison closing in the higher, it did so during a private challenge match in my Oakland school. My challenger was a master of Northern Shaolin, trained, respected, deadly, the type of fight that more often than not fed my hunger for confirmation. He attacked me with everything he had, and I fought back with him he had, and I fought back with technical perfection. Each move precisely as it should be, each counter precisely timed, a flawless victory. The crowd cheered, students applauded. Another flawless performance for the dragon. But standing there, observing my opponent bow in defeat, something cracked inside me. The victory felt hollow, like biting into a beautiful fruit and tasting ash that night. I couldn't sleep. The perfection of my performance haunted me. I returned to my training room, lit one candle, and started my customary meditation. But this time, it was different. Instead of concentration on my next achievement, my next display of power, I caught myself observing the candle flame. The flame didn't attempt to demonstrate its heat. It didn't execute its light. It merely was, and in that instant, I realized myself not the Bruce Lee others desired to see, but who I had become, a man so intent on proving his worth that he had forgotten to simply be worthy. I stood up and threw a punch, the same punch I had thrown thousands of times before. But this time, I wasn't trying to prove its speed or power for the first time since I was a child. I threw a punch simply to understand it. No expectations, no performance, just pure expression. The deep revelation struck me like a thunderbolt. I had perfected the technique of fending others, but was losing the fight with myself. Every victory was another link in a chain of expectations. Every flawless performance had dug my prison deeper. I found myself in a vicious cycle of proving, performing, perfecting, never letting myself simply be in that moment alone in my training room. I finally realized true mastery isn't about piling up victories. It's about freeing yourself from the necessity of them. The actual struggle wasn't in the ring. It never was. Water showed me what 1,000 wars could not. See it move. It doesn't seek to bypass the rock and draw out of its strength yet. The most majestic canyon bears witness to its force. It doesn't seek to demonstrate its strength yet. With time, it remakes mountains. It takes no shape, but this occurs. Same shapelessness makes it unbreakable. I had spent years constructing myself into something unbreakable, but water never breaks because it never resists. It flows, adapts, transmutes, pour it into any vessel, and it becomes that shape while remaining completely itself. This is not weakness. Weakness. This is the ultimate demonstration of power. The truth struck me like lightning. I had been attempting to become powerful by becoming unchangeable, by constructing walls, by resisting, by proving all along. But true power resided in the opposite direction, in becoming totally changeable, totally responsive, totally free of the requirement to prove anything. Ponder this paradox. The second you attempt to be powerful, you become weak, because your very attempt to be powerful stems from a place of weakness. It stems from a need. But when you move beyond this need, when you reach the very concept of being powerful, that is when you touch real power. This is why a master's movements appear effortless, not because they've practiced until they're perfect, but because they've released the need for perfection. They've gone beyond the ego. It craves affirmation. Their strength doesn't come from resistance, from utter acceptance, not from rigidity, but from absolute adjustability. I knew that throughout my life, I had been such a fist, a clenched, rigid, ready to hit, but a fist can be only a fist. It has one use, one shape. One use, one shape, one meaning. When you're a fist, everything appears to be a battle. Open up that fist, however, and all of a sudden your hand may become anything it may hold. Create, convey, connect. This is the crux of what I learned. True power isn't in what you can force, but what you can become. Knowledge wasn't enough. I had to change everything. My training, my teaching, my whole philosophy. Regarding martial arts, this wasn't about inventing a new style. It was about moving beyond the very idea of style itself. This was the creation of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. But it's not what most people imagine it is. Question every movement that was done for appearance sake. The classical mess, as I called it, had to end. No more elegant forms done in empty air. No more techniques kept just because they were old truth. Has no regard for age. I learned everything: Western, boxing, fencing, wrestling. I adapted what was good and dropped what was bad. My fellow traditionalists were appalled. You can't blend martial arts. They told you you're ending centuries of tradition, but I wasn't looking to save tradition. I was looking to free the human body and mind from the prison of style in my Kwan. We no longer practiced set patterns, rather we practiced reading energy, sensing intention, responding without thought. No more set postures, no more learned combinations. I taught my students to be like water, to allow their movements to flow out of the situation itself, not from some programmed form. The final aim wasn't to learn 1,000 methods, but to transcend technique altogether, to attain a state wherein your body reacts without the intrusion of thought, without the lag of decision, not through stern discipline, but through utter freedom. Not through addition of techniques, but through the subtraction of the unnecessary. This was the most difficult lesson for my students to understand. The greatest level of martial arts isn't about putting more in your arsenal. It's about taking away everything that isn't necessary, of eliminating all obstacles between intention and action, about becoming so hollow that you can hold everything, so shapeless that you can fit into anything. What I discovered in battle, in training, in those moments of quiet revelation, it was never about fighting. Life itself is the greatest adversary, and most of us treat it like beginner fighters, stiff, resistant, always trying to push our way through. I see it in the businessmen who are unable to adapt when his flawless plan breaks down, in the artist ensnared by her own success, in the parent who exhausts themselves trying to uphold an image of perfection. We're all waging the same war, not against outside forces, but against our own compulsion to control, to prove to be unshakable. Examine your own life. Where are you gripping when you might be flowing? Where are you resisting rather than responding? Each time you have the urge to prove yourself, ask, what are you actually fighting against? I fact this in my own family life. Hollywood needed the invincible Bruce Lee, but my son, Brandon, needed a father who could play, who could laugh, who could show vulnerability. My wife, Linda, needed a partner, not a legend. I had to learn to move between these worlds, like water changing its form, not through effort, but through natural response to what each moment demanded. When I walk onto a film set now, I don't bear the burden of being Bruce Lee when I enter my quad. Attempting to keep up an image when confronted with a challenge, I don't confront it with obstruction, but with readiness to flow, to become whatever the moment demands. This is real power, not the power to force your will, but the power to be free from needing to force anything, not the ability to overcome resistance, but the intelligence to navigate through love life without generating resistance in the first place. Remember the child I mentioned trying to catch water with his fists. We are all that child. The more we cling to power, to success, to perfection, the more it eludes our fingers. My greatest victory wasn't learning how to hold on more tightly. It was learning to release my hands entirely. You see, we all start as water, fluid, flexible, pure potential. Then life learns us to be ice hard, unchangeable, appearing strong. We believe this hardness is power. We believe this rigidity is strength, but ice can only be ice water, can be anything. I invested years of my life in constructing walls of accomplishment, only to find that authentic accomplishment is in having no walls at all. I trained to be supernatural, only to realize that the greatest art is becoming totally natural. I wished to be exceptional, only to discover the real power is in being precisely what every moment requires, nothing more, nothing less. This is my message to you. Don't try to be powerful. Try to be free. Don't strive to be exceptional. Try to be honest. Don't struggle to defeat life. Learn to flow with it. Your biggest enemy isn't failure or weakness or inability. Your biggest enemy is your own necessity to demonstrate that you have no failures, no weaknesses, no limitations. This isn't philosophy. This isn't martial arts. This is the core truth I uncovered. The ultimate mastery isn't rising above others. It's rising above yourself, not through force, but through freedom, not through resistance, but through release. Look within yourself. Where are your walls? Where is your ice? What would happen if you let them melt? This is the question that changed everything for me. Perhaps it will do the same for you. Remember, be water, my friend, not because water is strong, although it is not because water is formidable, although it can be water, since water never attempts to be anything other than what it is, and in such simple simplicity lies the might that can shift mountains.